Hi, it's Christy of So to Speak, and welcome back to the So to Speak Closet series. So, I don't know if you know this about me, but I had a time in my life where I was the perfect parent. Like, if you were in a restaurant, you wanted me to be the customer next to you because I knew exactly what to say or do to have your child obey and to have your child allow you to have a very peaceful and loving and fun family dinner so that all the other customers around you as well looked at you in admiration like, holy crap, like this is pretty awesome. Those people know what they're doing and they're such an amazing family. Oh my gosh. And then on a plane, forget it. I am the one you want to be on the plane with you going from New York to San Francisco because 3,000 miles across the country, forget it. I knew exactly what to say or do to make sure that your kid was not the kid in 14 window seat who was freaking out on the plane and making everybody want to tear their hair out. I knew exactly what to say or do to calm everybody down and to have your child actually enjoy the trip and not freak out. And of course, this was all before I actually became a parent because we are all the perfect parent before we actually become one. Because there's no such thing. We all know that. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. However, parenting is also one of the hottest button issues out there because everybody has something to say about it. And it really is up to us to choose to cut out the outside noise and once again look inside ourselves to understand more about who we are, what we value, what we believe in, and how we want to show up for our child. So fortunately for us, our next guest in the closet is Jackie Michael, who is a therapist and a parenting expert who also wrote this incredible book, Hooray for Parenting. And Jackie and I discuss so much about how it's how we're showing up. It's about what's going on with us that then is relayed to our kids. And so often we're quick to look outside of us to them or to see how we're stacking up with other people instead of just looking in. And Jackie has this fantastic book. Everybody, if I could just, rent a big van and go cross country with like an awesome playlist, a lot of Fleetwood Mac would be on there, and just go out of the sunroof and just throw you copies of this book, I would, because it is filled with tips in a way that's so digestible. You don't have to read it all at once. You can pick it up at any point. There is a flow to it from beginning to end. And at the same time, you can pick it up at any point. She has these wonderful quotes from people. She has actual doable exercises at the end of each chapter, really short, again, bite-size, digestible chapters to help you to just reflect. So it's not necessarily telling you like a how-to parent. It's more out of you reflecting on how you're showing up in ways that you specifically can adjust your surroundings and yourself to make it be a more harmonious environment. And one of my favorite quotes ever by my fellow Lebanese, Khalil Gibran, she opens up in the introduction. And somewhere along the way, I think if I did ancestry.com, Khalil and I would be related. Wishful thinking, but still. Okay. And the quote that she opens up with is, "You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth." I just love that. So without further ado, I want you to realize that it doesn't matter where you are on the spectrum of parenting. Your kids may have just left for college. You may be grandparents at this point. You may be pregnant. You may have kids just starting kindergarten or in high school. No matter where you are on the spectrum of parenting, if you have children of any age, you are not going to want to miss this episode. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy your conversation.
And I got very interested in all the research and presentations on leadership. And so I started workshops for women in leadership. And I did those both in Houston and in the Utica area. But one of the things that occurred to me as I was working with, entrepreneurs and executives was that they were receiving and engaging in all this training about communication, relationships, how to be masterful in your leadership. And none of that was available to parents. And my thought always has been that parents are the most important leaders there are. And what the parenting book is really the culmination of is integrating my learning from all these different disciplines, kind of distilling things and simplifying it in a short, the chapters are pretty short and
Yes.
it's easy to deal with.
Yes.
Uh,
It's digestible and
yeah,
bite-sized pieces. It's like tapas. Like you can choose, you can flip. I mean, there is a through line. I also feel like you can open to any area. You can jump around. And
yeah,
so if you start from the beginning and you go to the end, there is a nice flow, very beautiful.
uh-huh,
You still can open and go, oh my gosh, this is, I like doing that. It's fun. It's like a fun thing to pick up a book and just go stop, and then I just look and see what message is supposed to come to me that day.
oh,
um,
yes,
and you just have these beautiful quotes. So just to go back to your point, it's super just for anybody who's like, I can't read, I don't have time for a book, or I'm not going to be able to read the whole thing, or I need to do it on audio. It's small little, it's a workbook too. So you can work into it, which we'll talk about in a second, but just to stress that again, it's super digestible little bite-sized pieces that every page has something to take home. I mean, it's remarkable. I love it. So yes, so continue.
well, I was going to say, and this leads into the whole workbook idea.
Yes.
um, Essentially at the end of each chapter is at least one question,
Mm-hmm.
and the questions are really designed to help people think through their own thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things I know from working with people for so many years is that people need to integrate and internalize things. They're just giving advice or telling people how to do things doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that those kinds of to-dos aren't valuable and important, but people need to, and parents especially, need to think through what is it that's driving them. And when they understand that, they also understand more about their children. You can't make another person think the way you want them to think. Uh, and that is kind of a little bit of a faulty way in our culture that we think, that if you do the right thing, you say the right thing, then your kids are going to turn out the right way. Except that doesn't always happen. and and parents are shocked when they've given all their love, they've done everything they could possibly do to make their kids happy, and then the kids turn around and are rebellious, angry, unappreciative, won't do their chores, things like that. So Daniel Siegel, he's a neuropsychiatrist, and he has, using all the research around the brain, which has happened in the last 20, maybe 30 years, and he coined the word mindsight as a way of talking about one's ability to step outside of oneself and reflect on what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what's going on inside, even what has triggered you. And when we're able to cultivate that skill, and he talks of it as a skill, we have much more mastery over our own actions and reactions. And I can give you an example of that in a young person that I worked with some time ago. He had been referred to me because he had punched somebody. And I was able to talk to him about his brain.
Mhm.
And there are very simple ways, and Daniel Siegel he has his own model for talking about the brain. There's another woman, Goldie Hawn. She has a fabulous foundation. Her
Yes.
her passion is about children.
Yes. I
Uh,
just heard about this recently. It's like the mindfulness, like meditation, something for kids.
Yes, actually, there's she has written a book, 10 Mindful Minutes, and she references Daniel Siegel. I don't know.
Oh, cool.
And
Okay.
and she also has manuals for teachers, educators. She has a whole series of um, curriculum
Mhm.
starting from kindergarten up through eighth grade. And she has a slightly different model about the brain, but I
Mhm.
tell you, she has um, kindergartners learning about their brains
Mm.
and doing mindful minutes and meditating in the classroom at the
I
beginning of
love it.
every day.
Mm.
So she's wonderful, and she's worked closely with Dr. Siegel. Um, so it's a very powerful tool,
Yeah.
and it depersonalizes things. So this young man, I don't know if I said this, this young man, um, every time he'd get angry, instead of feeling like striking out, he would say, "Oh, that's my amygdala um, being triggered." So the amygdala is that fight or flight part
Right.
of the brain.
Yeah.
And when it gets triggered, the emotions, the tensions arise. And so, in that way, he began to regulate his actions, which made a huge difference in his capacity in school. And so,
Oh,
that's a very
yeah.
specific example. But I think it also leads into the whole question of children having some understanding about their own background assumptions and how they've wired things together.
Yeah. Speak more to that. Speak more to that. I love the, you're just embrace. So you said it's so specific, and I think the more specific, the better in regards for people to grasp that. The self-regulation is huge. We don't learn. I mean, the fact that we're talking about kids learning that is just incredible. It's not taught. It's very, and my first thought right now is because a majority of adults don't know how to teach it because they were never taught it. So it's kind of this cyclical generational massive, like, I don't know. So I love that it's starting early, and I want to just defer to you that what you're talking about kids, but transcends age. Like adults can be using some of the techniques or whatever, wherever you're about to go with this as well, or is it age appropriate?
Oh, absolutely. So, one of the things I've done in my workshops with women in leadership is I use the model that Goldie Hawn has about the brain. It's so simple to understand. And I always start by saying, you can grasp this because this is presented to kindergartners. And then I talk about the distinctions, very, very simple, uh, between the executive function of the brain versus the amygdala that gets triggered, and versus the memory bank. And so it gives people the capacity, again, to understand themselves in a depersonalized way, because so often we make judgments and evaluations about ourselves as if that's reality, as if that's the truth, rather than that there are things that are going on in our thinking and feeling that um, I loosely say made up, but we jump to conclusions about ourselves as adults, but also as children. And I
Mhm.
also know it's true, again, from my therapy work, that people People sometimes carry decisions they made at an early age. They're not aware of it until they start to reflect like this. And suddenly they realize, oh, I've operated my whole life on top of that situation. Often happens with, a high school boyfriend or love that rejected them and how that left them feeling, and then they forget about it. But in some ways it just drives them through life. Of a little girl, or maybe yeah, yeah, or a little boy. I forget how I referenced it in the book, but had gone to a restaurant with her family, and her her parents and her brothers at the end of the meal got up, went and paid the bill, and they they went around the corner to the cashier. She was uh, behind them, and she thought they had left her. She she became so frightened and sad, and that sense of fear of being left and helpless persisted. So she even had trouble watching scary movies, anything like that would trigger that feeling of fear. And again, she was 6 years old at the time. And just by talking about that, she could see that was a decision she made. She could hold on to that and keep being terrified, or she could get that that was just something she decided
Mhm.
in that moment. There are lots of instances like that with children. And I think it's so important that parents understand that,
Yes.
because we see actions and behaviors on the part of children as
Mhm.
if it's ingrained in them, rather than something happened, they made a decision,
Mhm.
and they have the capacity to understand that and see things differently. To look at those things in oneself that are getting in your way, that takes courage, and but it's so liberating and so freeing. And also, and that's part of what understanding the brain uh, is helpful with. And maybe I should take a little sidebar here for a moment and talk about the work in happiness and gratitude. If we actually focus on something that brings us joy or something positive, we actually take 10 seconds. Say you're walking past a flower, or you see some beautiful trees, or you notice your child laughing. Takes 10 seconds and let it sink in, let it be a bodily experience. That actually changes the wiring in your brain. That's also the point Dan Siegel is making. So again, it depersonalizes things. It gives you the understanding that you have the possibility of rewiring your brain for the rest of your life. I mean, we can address this in ourselves every day, when we're in a bad mood, when we feel critical, whatever, to take the time and shift our focus and let it sink in. Okay, so when you begin to experience that in yourself, it 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 makes it more comfortable and natural to talk to your children like that. And kids may or may not be receptive, but it doesn't hurt to help them understand that they have a choice, that they can actually change the wiring in their brain, and that their capacity to choose how they want to feel, how they want to manage problems and upsets is in their hands. And when parents understand that, it's helpful so that they don't think they need to fix everything, that they have to do everything to make their children happy, that their children can't be angry if they want to be angry.
I have two things to add to what you said, but I just want to say it's everything you're saying is your book. So there's nothing better than reading a book and then realizing that the person, when you meet them, matches up. Like just the way you're speaking, and then also in regards to, it's not just about like attaining the knowledge. What good is that? You have
Exactly.
applicable ways that you can say these are options, and you do it in such a friendly way, like a very powerful way, versus saying this is how you have to do it. There's no sense of condescending tone or I know what I'm talking about. And you know, sometimes experts get to like the top of the mountain and they look down at all the minions below, like
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I'm not going to show you the steps to rise up here. I'm going to speak to you from here and just tell you what I know, and you have to stay down there.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
like you show how to do that, just like you're just doing now, like just ways to be able to empower yourself. So you were talking about kids not possibly being receptive. So instead of a parent feeling like, what's the point? This isn't working. Can you just touch upon the power of modeling for a little bit?
Um, yes. I so one of the things I think, again, this is an abstraction that I talk about in the book. Uh, I I I call it context, and that is a way it is referred to. And again, this is a concept that's addressed in leadership, and like in the business world. How do you create the field or the context in which either the business operates, or and the example I use is how there's something invisible, like when you walk into, say, a Lord and Taylor's, you experience something different than when you walk into Walmart. And so there's something going on that's invisible, that isn't spoken. So in that sense, as parents, modeling where they're coming from in their attitudes, their values, their whole way of being is informing what's going on inside of the household.
Yes.
Now, that's another thing that's hard for parents necessarily to own or to get, because if their kids start misbehaving, they they want to say, "Oh, it's the kid." And rather than looking at the whole picture, what's going on here? Where's this coming from? So so to be attentive to what you're modeling, and I've had the thought in this pandemic, when things are so difficult for parents, the challenge to model a way of being, um, confidence, kind of a sense of okayness, whatever the word is, that we'll get through this, and as hard as it is, we have the capacity to model that kind of
I'm hearing
way of
resilience.
being.
Yeah, I'm hearing resilience big time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
um, Speaks volumes,
sure.
because if they're operating out of anxiety, and we know the stress is enormous, worries about money, worries about kids going to school, all of that, but somehow, again, to be able to step aside, set your own reactivity aside, and consciously look at what are you modeling for your kids.
Yes.
um,
I love the analogy of the department store in Walmart. And you can say energy. That's what that's what I'm hearing. It's the energy. It's the
that,
energy in
that's
the space,
that's right.
right? It's
Yeah.
it's it's not, it's science. You know, we sometimes, I don't know if this is, I just feel like sometimes people steer away from it because it sounds so new age. It's science. Like we're vibrating beings, and people are going to be affected by it.
Exactly.
And we have
Yep.
to take accountability for it. We have to take accountability for how we're showing up.
Yeah.
It's just, that's our part of our responsibility and duty. And uh, you talking about checking in with yourself, to not just project it on your child is invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
invaluable because at such a young age, kids can't decipher. They speak to this more. My thought is that for a 7-year-old or a 9-year-old to feel that, they're getting, I'm not lovable, I'm wrong. They're getting that.
Mm-hmm.
They're not mature enough mentally to understand that there's so much more complexity to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they also, when you're growing up in the family, what is going on occurs as this is what life is. This is what the world is, because you don't see outside of that. And so the healthier, the more um, kind of loving and relaxed it can be in spite of the realities. And that's not to discount the challenges, because it's how you cope with the challenges as well. But to be able to create that space then is a lesson to the children that this is a kind, loving, grateful
World, Jackie, yes, because they only have the thought process of the 4 walls, because that is their mental space of the house that you're creating. So that is in their head indicative of outside the 4 walls of the home.
Yes, exactly.
It's beautiful. It's so beautiful. Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh wow. All right. So I'm feeling overwhelmed. Like, we only have this amount of time and I have so many questions for you. So I'm trying to keep it cool. But
Okay.
inside I'm like, rah. Okay. So on top of the modeling, I'm hearing a lot of, I may be projecting this as well, but I do hear that some parents out there might be like, okay, so modeling is super important. Can you speak to being human over being perfect?
Well, I think we shouldn't try to be perfect. We're not perfect. And children have a lot of room for forgiveness, maybe a lot more than we do as adults. And it really isn't about being perfect, it's about being real and responsible for oneself. Because one of the things I felt like I should add to what we were talking about was that what happens sometimes to parents when their kids are, let's say, misbehaving or nasty or unappreciative, is it triggers in the parents, kind of like, how dare you, or um, anger, frustration, helplessness, and all of that. And then they take that out on the kid. So we all make mistakes. We all sometimes yell or punish or do things that in retrospect we wish we hadn't. It doesn't mean that we can't acknowledge that perhaps we were unkind or jumped to conclusions or blamed them. But then talk about what it is we would like to have happen, how we would like to be able to talk about it or work out the problem. So, yeah, a lot of compassion for oneself as a parent, and really remembering how much is required of us as parents, and again, without any real training. Mostly mostly what parents do is they either do what their parents did because they think it was good, or they do the opposite. Um, because
Or even isn't there an in between where it's subconscious and you think you're not doing what your parents did, but in a way you are?
oh yeah, that
Like, I'm so not going to be like this parent or that parent. And then next thing you know, you're like, oh my gosh. You just hear
absolutely,
words out of your mouth and you're like, what just happened?
that's right. Exactly, yeah.
So, and I wanted to, just for the two things that you said, uh, in regards to being real and showing real emotion, and it's not all hunky-dory Pollyanna and stifling different emotions.
Uh-huh.
When you were talking about anger, and then you said helplessness, and it made me just had a thought of like, so many times, isn't it all really feeling out of control and helpless? So we project anger onto our kid, or we project frustration or annoyance because we're just feeling out of control if we don't have the answer, or there's so much going on. So that helplessness and that out of control seems to be the underlying feeling, that fear. And we show it in like maybe biting comments when really it's that at the base of it.
Yeah, yeah. Out of control and not knowing what to do. And that's where I think this tendency for parents to think they need to fix everything. They need to have the solution. They need to defend themselves, uh, prove something,
And
prove
isn't
they're
that,
right.
yeah, like, so in the fixing, listen, I absolutely have, and probably will continue to do this, but I've definitely gotten very aware of it, where it's unnerving. It's very unnerving being aware when you start, until you get more comfortable with it, like you were saying before, like feeling comfortable and then go, okay, but
Uh-huh.
the jumping into fix, I realize that so many times it's because I'm uncomfortable. And
Hmm.
I realize, like, okay, if Veronica or Luke, and it really goes beyond parenting, it could be in the workplace, any relationship, really, workplace,
Hmm.
otherwise, where so often, not all the time, so often helpers jump in to fix for good intentions, and also because they're uncomfortable. So then now they're more comfortable because the person, it's also a self-fulfilling identity of, I just helped, I just say, and
Hmm.
it in the end can be really disempowering to the person, because the other person isn't able to figure it out for themselves and gain more internal power. Can you speak to that? Agree, disagree, in between?
Yeah, well, it also assumes that you know the answer, you know the right fix. It also points to the discomfort of whoever, you or whoever, um, with what's going on, and the difficulty in dealing with your own discomfort. And that's I would say, the most automatic, natural response for people and for parents. One of the things I was going to reference was David Brooks, who's a columnist for, I think, the New York Times, and he's on PBS. Um, wrote a book called The Road to Character. And he talks about many things, but he talks about the shift in the culture to what he calls the big me, where everything is focused on the individual and having the individual be happy and feel good about themselves. And I really think that I've seen that shift in my career over the years, that when the whole focus shifted to self-esteem, then everything became about making kids happy and feeling good about themselves, as if that was going to come from the outside in by getting a trophy or whatever, rather than their own accomplishment and their own inner sense of uh, their capacities. And I think that's where this whole idea about the growth mindset comes
Yes, you're reading my mind. Yes.
in.
But you need the mind sight to remind you of the mindset that you're in. Does it
Yes.
make sense that you would get? So if you could just briefly let people know about Carol Dweck's work, people who may not be familiar about it, before you go. I don't mean to cut your thought. I hope you remember it still, but just before we go there, some people aren't familiar with growth and fixed mindset. So if you could just give a little bit of info on that first.
Sure. Um, it's a wonderful, simple way of uh, understanding how we relate to the world. So A growth mindset is a willingness to have coaching, to be corrected, to work hard, try harder. And you see this in athletics. I mean, she uses that a lot as a model where a kid wants to better himself, wants to be coached, doesn't feel devastated if they haven't done so well, because the drive to to learn and to grow is the most powerful thing. The fixed mindset is the the person that could be a child or a grown up that feels devastated by criticism, uh, always feels they have to be better than everyone else. Either that, or they take the position that, well, I'm a loser and there's no point in trying. And so often, very, very accomplished people just totally give up because they don't want to be criticized. They're afraid that if they try again, they might not look as good as they did. And so it's just a very simple concept. And the truth is, we all have places within ourselves that are fixed, and then places that are growth mindset. But part of the possibility in parenting is to help your children be committed to growing and learning and not be devastated by mistakes, failures, uh, correction, but to only use that to help motivate and grow and become a more expansive person.
Yes. And yes to everything. Yes, yes, yes. And how would you suggest that people who maybe were aware of the two different mindsets or just learning about it now, and they're like, oh my gosh, I've ruined my child, instead of freaking out, like how can they shift to themselves too? Because this is like, if you have a pulse, you've you're growing. That's just the way it goes. But
Yeah.
what would you suggest for someone who really wants to figure out how to be very conscious of shifting to a growth mindset in themselves and with their family? What would be one of the first steps, or some language to say to themselves?
Well, I think first of all to understand that both are parts of all of us. So to condemn oneself um, for where we haven't done what we thought might have been the best thing to do, actually, all that does is leave us stuck and fixed in the same place. so, so uh, it's learning in a sense that we have to be humble, that we all make mistakes, and that that there's the possibility inside of accepting that um, that we can be more of who we want to be. and and I think what you said about a parent saying, oh my gosh, I've ruined my child, I think that's how you said it. Again, that kind of way of viewing yourself as a parent is assumes this simple cause effect way of relationship. So uh, it's like, if I didn't do the right thing, then my kid is not going to turn out right. The other side of the hand is, if I do the right thing, they will turn out right. That is not
It's true.
that's not the world we live in. Uh,
True.
you know, and it's understanding that there's something self-generating within all of us,
Mm-hmm.
and the opportunity really is to support and kind of nudge the best in who we are and the best in who our children are. And I guess going back to the the culture in which we are, which we create in our home or the context, um, to have room within that, one, that we all make mistakes, and two, that who you are is whole and complete and totally able. And you as a parent and you as children. So you relate to the best of who kids are, the best of who you are, your friends are,
Mhm.
rather than the downside.
Yes.
And that takes ongoing commitment
It
and
does.
awareness.
It does. And it's making me think of, you referenced in the book also Rick Hansen. I love the quote that you referenced. I've heard it before and I was like, yes, Jackie. The Teflon, can you share?
Oh yes, I love that. I use that all the time.
So
People get
true.
it instantly.
Mhm.
Yeah, oh, where Teflon for the oh, I'm getting for the positive and
Yes.
Velcro. Oh, okay, it
Yes.
goes that way. We're Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive.
Mhm.
And it's just again from a survival point of view, that's how we've been wired. We that fight or flight I was talking about, the
Mhm.
amygdala. You kind of want to think if a bear is coming at you in the forest, you you want to act quickly, and you want to be on the alert for danger. That's how we are wired biologically. That's why this whole idea of understanding the brain is so important, because we have stronger neural pathways for the negative, but it is possible that we can strengthen the pathways for the positive.
Yes.
So that's what can happen in mindfulness. That's what can happen in that exercise I mentioned, Rick Hansen
Yes.
said, of pausing, taking in. It also happens, I mean, there's research that shows being grateful, and it requires practice.
It
You know,
does.
that's another thing I refer to as practice, practice, practice.
Yes.
These are
And
not,
it,
these aren't automatic things.
yes. And there's something so encouraging about that. And that's so everything you're saying right now is so growth mindset. It's all growth mindset. So
Yep.
it's so mindset is so much more effort, practice over
Yep.
fixed mindset is product and done. And that's what it is. And
Yeah.
no gray. There's no, and everybody talks about gray. It's like, what about the rainbow? Let's shift it to rainbow. Like there's black and white, and then there's a plethora of colors in between. It's not just two.
Uh-huh.
So it's just so encouraging. And I have to say too that we hear gratitude all the time, and when we start hearing these buzzwords, there's a tendency just to desensitize it in us, like, oh, gratitude again. And so we have a tendency to, mindfulness is another one. I have to say, you were very fresh. It was a very fresh take on gratitude, just the way that you brought up how to do it. You actually have practices in here of ways to build your own gratitude practice, which I just loved it. And I have to be completely transparent. I have not laughed or cried at the same time in a book in years. I was laughing at moments because I was getting nostalgic for things. I was crying at moments, just not even out of sadness, like, oh my gosh, I have so much work to do as a parent, but just like, oh, I'm so grateful for this book. Like, the way that you worded everything was just, it was like a huge hug. It was like, it was so encouraging. This book is all about encouragement. And I just want to, if I could, I just want to share like one or two practices that you have in here for gratitude.
Sure.
Give people a little sneak peek. I love that you say true gratitude is more than a quick thank you or simply being polite, because
Hmm.
so often we do have a tendency, because we're in such a we're in busy like a badge kind of
Hmm.
society, that we're just going to even rush through gratitude.
Yes.
Can you speak to that?
Well, I think it's kind of like you said that well, both for ourselves and our children, we think that a quick thank you does the trick rather than the really allowing oneself again to contemplate, think through. And it's not easy for children. They don't, first of all, they don't necessarily understand the word. Um, so it's valuable to try to help them connect feelings that they have. It could be feelings of joy, playfulness, and connect that with possibly the word thankfulness. So so I think it's really working with ourselves and reminding ourselves. Um, and I'll tell you, I've recently been leading a Saturday morning um, uh, Zoom call with people, and so we took on the project of writing thank you notes and trying to do it 7 in a week. It's very interesting because what happens when you have that kind of structure to connect to and people expecting things of you, it really makes you think more deeply. Okay, so who am I really grateful for that I have never thanked? Um, and are there people that are doing things for us that we just take for granted? So, for instance, one of the things I realized during this pandemic, the mailman is out there every week, every day. And and so I wrote him a thank you note. But anyway, it's being mindful, and it's holding yourself accountable, and it is in fact easier if you have other people uh, that you're going to connect with, which actually is one of the other things that I hope out of this book. And I'm in the middle of working on a workbook that has even more questions than are in the book. But
Oh, fantastic. I love it. And you're going to do a workshop online for all of us, right? I'm just kidding. Jackie did not say that. I'm just suggesting that maybe you do that. Okay.
it's a possibility. Um, but one of the things I'm encouraging is that parents get together,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and it could be through Zoom calls and work on some of these questions together. And I think I referenced the fact that, like, when I was a young mother in Boston, we lived right in the heart of the city,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a little park in the neighborhood, and all the parents would go over. The kids would play in the park, and we would sit there and talk about all our questions and how do you handle this, and um, it was so powerful. But parenting today has become a lot more isolated. um, so many mothers are working and rushed, busy, like you were saying, have no time. But I just really encourage people, whether it's through a church, a school, the local library, or just some friends, like people get together for book clubs, um, to get together and use the book as a guide, and then eventually the workbook, which will have a guide for running a discussion group.
Like
Uh-huh.
one of them, which we're going to talk about in a second, in regards to interconnectedness to nature, just like how as a kid did you love playing outside? Just it was a question like that. Do you remember? Am I
Yes,
botching that?
yes.
It's
I
right.
think it's recall a time
Yeah,
you experienced in nature as a kid.
yeah, and it was so powerful. It was so powerful, and so all of that connects back to gratitude. That was where I was going, is that when you talk about, you have so many great bolded, very clear ways to remind you. You said, just like you said before, create visual reminders such as magnets, signs, or pop-ups on your computer.
Hmm.
All three. I noticed too that when you do that, I have little, by the door, I have little Chinese food takeouts kind of taped up around the ones that resonated, and I pass them all the time and I catch them when I'm supposed to. You know,
Uh-huh.
so many times I don't even see them, and then all of a sudden I see it, and I'm like, oh, I do have to remember that everybody be kind because everybody's fighting their own battle. Okay, and it's like the perfect timing, right before I'm about to have a conversation with someone that I'm
Uh-huh.
feeling triggered by, or and knowing that we're all interconnected. So, can you talk about that just in regards to what that means to you, the magnitude of it, but on a micro and a macro level?
Um, a book that was written um, actually for educators, but also parents, called When a Butterfly Sneezes. And it's a woman who is an expert in systems theory, and systems theory is about understanding the circular nature of things and how everything's connected. And she points out in this book um, different children's stories, such as the Lorax, that are demonstrations of how one thing leads to another thing, which leads to another thing, and then loops back and causes another thing. The world that most of us grew up in was a simple linear cause effect world. And that's close to what I was saying about this notion that if you do the right thing, then your kids are going to turn out okay. It's linear. It doesn't take into account the impact of one interaction upon the next interaction and the circular nature of it. And I think it's extremely important that as adults, in terms of the future of our planet, but also the future for our children in terms of relationships and connection to others, that we understand that our actions make a difference and impact in a way that might, in the short run, not seem like anything, but in the long run, have a long term effect.
Book you talked about interconnectedness and gratitude, meaning that the more your child's in nature and they start appreciating the trees and they start appreciating, then they will, for our macro level, have more of a connection to our environment, so they will then change the direction and trajectory of the impact on our environment because they'll feel more connected and grateful for it. It's
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, it's just it's so powerful. And going back to what you were talking about earlier about the nature deficit disorder, just to get, I mean, COVID's taught us anything, so many things. There's
Yes.
tons of tragedies. And at the same time, there's such precious, clear quality over quantity opportunities for gratitude of nature is one at the top I hear consistently. Getting outside, appreciating colors are more vibrant, you're appreciating breathing more and air and the impact that has. So I just want to highlight that you really do go into that in the book as well.
That ability to appreciate others' contributions to us,
Mm-hmm.
that actually enhances our relationship with other people
Mm-hmm.
and also opens us up to the insights and contributions of other people or criticisms.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it works in a circular way.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the more the more we experience the the possibility of other people's contributions and the more grateful we are,
Mm-hmm.
um, it just keeps building on
I'm
itself.
sure you've heard the Viktor Frankl about that having the space in between.
Hmm.
There's a stimulus and then there's this ton of space that we don't see
Hmm.
before we react or respond. And this is the freedom of where
Yes.
we choose. And the mind sight allows us to stretch the space. We're
Yes.
in control of that space.
Uh-huh.
So I just love how it all of it is interconnected. It's interconnected with us, with our family, with nature, with the world. And so if you can speak to, you just touched upon the emotion. I love that in the book, how you said, does this emotion belong to me or does it and I love how you said safety and health.
Hmm.
Those are great clear check-ins too, like safety, health,
Hmm.
yes, duty as a parent, emotions, does the upset belong to me or does the upset belong to your child?
Right. Yes. It's like whose problem is who's here.
Yes.
So one of the issues, that's been very common in this current era is parents jumping in schools, colleges, trying to solve their children's problems for them. Like, why did my darling get a C instead of an A? And I mean, I've heard this kind of feedback from professors in college, from educators in elementary and high school, and uh, the whole empowering your child to actually handle their own issues and uh, supporting them in doing that is very different than calling up the school and saying,
Yes.
so,
Listen up, parents. Yes. Like, let's highlight this. Go for it, Jackie. You've got the floor.
and essentially requesting in one way or another, whether directly or not, that they treat your little darling better. And to be able to see whether you're over identified with your child
Mm-hmm.
and in some ways disempowering them by doing that. Are
Mm-hmm.
you speaking for them, or do you help them learn how to speak for themselves? Do you help them learn to go and talk to the teacher about the difficulty they're having? Are you helping them to be responsible um, for their own performance?
Yes.
And yeah, it's
So invaluable. It's so, and it's a way to shift future generational family and world dynamics.
yes, absolutely.
And self-compassion while you're going through that process. You touched upon this before, but I definitely feel like it's worth reiterating.
Mm-hmm.
It's huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
It's just huge.
it's like having the space to be human, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
And owning the fact that we all have all sides of ourselves,
Mhm.
but then also knowing we have this capacity to choose our actions. And I think that all this new information about the brain really gives us all tools
Mhm.
that were not available in the same way before. Um, it used to be that our feelings were the thing that controlled us. We didn't have the capacity to separate out our feelings and notice that we could shift. And that's one of the things Dan Siegel talks about. He has models,
Mhm.
and if people are interested in delving into all this, there's so much rich material.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But his thing is the wheel of awareness, and that we're in the hub, and we can shift uh, where we focus on the rim of the wheel. And so we can shift from negative to positive, from self blame to insight and acknowledgement. And part of my intention is to kind of expand people's thinking, and also to understand that it's holistic. That's part of, I think, out of my experience working with people and executives and leaders in business, that these are as important conversations in their personal lives as they are in the business setting.
Mhm.
And to be able to embrace that and get it's part of our being more effective, being
Mhm.
more masterful, and
Mhm.
creating the results we want. So often parents wait until things are going really wrong before they seek help, or before they seek insight into how they're being with their kids. And it's it's pretty characteristic that when parents get to that point, they want some kind of a quick fix and they come looking for advice. But it's so much more complicated, and I think, and so much more holistic. And if parents could actually open themselves up, not feel blamed or fearful when their kids are young, uh, to start exploring some of these distinctions, I think it would be so much more empowering both to them and to their kids, and they would end up feeling so much more successful.
Can you speak to any parents right now who had a fantastic relationship with their kid when maybe, let's say, 6, 7 years old, and now the child is 16, 17 years old, and the child may, the teenager may seem like a totally different person. There may be a total disconnect. Can you give any advice or hope for, I know it seems slightly vague because it's not a specific situation, but
No, actually, I think it's a very good question. And I'll refer back to Dan Siegel. And he has a book called Brainstorm. In fact, he has books for every age, um, the adults, uh, the professionals, the parents and kids. So, but in Brainstorm, he talks about the fact that what is happening to the teenager's brain is kind of like a reconstruction. And he, uh, I think, likens it to a building under construction that all of a sudden everything crashes and caves in. There are major things going on in the brain of a teenager, and again, I think we have clearer understanding of that than uh, we did before. I mean, we knew that teenagers, people dreaded their kids becoming teenagers, and we knew they were rebellious and all that. But to understand that at this point in their lives, there there is a real shift in what's going on in the brain as they integrate who they really are as a person and shed some of the even the brain cells, they call it pruning, from where they were as a child. So in other words, like if you don't use the brain cells that are have the capacity, let's say, for you to be a musician, if those aren't used the whole way through, what happens in the brain is you'll shed those off for uh, solidifying where you're focused and going. So one is, I think it's important to understand and accept the fact that teenagers are in the process of becoming their own person, that there's a certain normalcy to their rejecting their parents. There's also a normalcy to go back and forth, that, wanting to be a kid and taking care about the one at one moment and be independent and have their own way at another. And so I think, again, this is where, as a parent, if you don't take it personally, like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with me or what's wrong with them, that you bring yourself into the relationship from the place of understanding and knowing that there are things they're wrestling with. And I personally believe it's it's really valuable to always believe in your kids. If you have a sense of the goodness of who they are, and I'll tell you again from my experience, I've seen teenagers stop talking to their parents, um, be kind of mean, and yet I've seen those same teenagers 5 years later be as close to their parents as one could be. So there's a process of maturation, and the more you as a parent can embrace that and continue your commitment and love and patience, uh, and trust that on the other side, the things that you've taught them are going to show up and be expressed. The, the their sensitivity to other people, their caring, um, their sense of responsibility, and so it's a really tough period of time. And the thing I'll say about this book on brainstorm, the way Daniel Siegel has written it, it's designed to read with your teenagers. So if they're open to to sharing with you, you could either read the book together, or you could read the book as a parent of a teenager and find ways of understanding and connecting and sharing with them. But it is a tough time.
That's so, it's just so beautiful the way that you just worded that, with hope and understanding. And there was depersonalization too, going
Yep.
back to what you were saying, because it has to do with beyond us. It has to do with the way that we're wired as humans.
Yeah. Yeah.
And any parent who's out there who may be thinking, okay, it's part of the process, and at the same time, there, you know how you had said that you've seen kids be mean or say things that might be hurtful. It's so personal what we value, for sure, and where our line gets crossed. Do you have any insight or advice in regards to creating the boundary? It's part of the process. I respect that. And at the same time, there's a boundary. Any advice at all in regards to navigating that?
Well, you have to be willing, if you set a boundary, and obviously there are boundaries to be set, you have to be willing for your kids to be angry at you and not take it personally. Um, and I mean, this is a real challenge, is like with cell phones and things, the media, video games. Um, the jury is out on how damaging some of that is to kids. I do think that as much as kids are resistant and rebellious and get angry, they also want the sense that somebody's in charge and that there are limits. So I think you have to distinguish again between what you feel is appropriate in terms of limit setting, um, versus the reaction your kids have to it. And again, if you've worked on this all along, makes it easier because the kids kind of have a sense of
Yes.
what your limits are.
For parents who maybe were not listening that well when the kids were younger, for whatever reason, whether they were working or they just weren't present for whatever reason, there is still hope, even if it's more difficult, even though their kids are older.
Mm-hmm.
What would be one strategy to just venture into that territory, even if their kids giving them a lot of pushback, like, mom or dad, you've never been like this, psst, whatever?
Mm-hmm.
How can they stick with it and keep going forward?
Well, let me preface it by saying I've had the experience working with executives of uh, introducing some form of the listening exercise that I have in the book. And they were shocked to discover they didn't listen. That what people, unless they're conscious of this, what people do is they're thinking about, what am I going to say next? Or what's my opinion about that? And, uh, or they're distracted, you know. I think frequently parents have their mind some other place when when they're with their kids, thinking about work or whatever. So I think the first thing is to recognize or to take a look at, how good are you at listening? Now, listening is being able to put yourself in another person's shoes and get what's so or what their experience is for themselves. It's not about agreeing or disagreeing. Um, and when you have, well, I should say, as far as the point about not really focusing on listening until the kids are older, people are dying to be listened to, no matter how old they are.
Mm.
And and part of that is people want to be understood. They want to be gotten.
Mm-hmm.
So if your kid gives you a lip when you start to be more attentive and present, what you want to get is what that's like for them, so that you hear they're annoyed with you or they think you're a jerk. uh, what's happened to you, and and to actually let that sink in rather than trying to defend yourself. But I think that's what parents do when they get, let's say, attacked by their teenagers, or told that they're being stupid or whatever. They take it personally and then want to defend themselves. Like, you don't understand, or don't you dare talk to me like that,
Right.
or
Right away to disrespect. You're being disrespectful just to shut it down.
yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
Rather than say, I mean, there's two things you can say. I get that you're really annoyed with me, and thank you for letting me know.
Let's
And
just pause there. If that was said, like, if that was said to the vast majority of teenagers, I think their minds would be blown. I think they would be so, like, their mouths would hit the floor.
that's right.
They wouldn't know what to do with themselves.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that's part of the purpose. uh, you see, one of the things about us as human beings is we always want to be right.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I make you wrong, you're going to automatically make me wrong. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's just how we're wired. That's
Yeah.
how we work.
Yeah.
And so if your kid starts to, give you lip, let's say, and then you make them wrong, you know what? They're just going to come back either silently or mouth off at you and make you wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I always say to parents, they're going to win. You're not. so so the thing is, you don't want to get into bantering and trying to prove to them they shouldn't they shouldn't feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
You can set the boundary and say, I'm not going to listen to you talk like that, or you're not allowed to talk to me like that.
Yeah. You can feel
And
that way. You just don't get to talk to me like that.
yeah, exactly.
That's it. That's the strong boundary too. We're having our kid, if we're so present for our kids, their expectation for being the center of attention when they go out in the world then is going to be here. It's going to be so high, and that's just not real life. Can you speak to that?
Well, being present doesn't mean indulging. So that's a distinction I think that's
Mm-hmm.
useful to make.
Mm-hmm.
It's also true that being present doesn't have to be huge swaths of time. Um, you could be in the car with your kid, and you could be talking on your cell phone. You could be thinking about what you're going to get at the grocery store. Or you could say, this is a precious moment. Um, we could really talk about something. Um, I could ask questions and try to really understand where my kid is at.
Mm-hmm.
So being present can take place in very short periods of time.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean, like, if you're a working parent or you're doing volunteer work and your kids feel like you're never available. If you're available, really fully there at at little spots in time. That's huge. I would say if they've had this experience of really being listened to and understood, that's who they're going to be.
What a way to end this, Jackie. Knocking it out of the park. This is, you know, it makes me, you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of being a kid and reading Judy Blume.
Oh,
I loved Judy Blume. And it was that same type of feeling, like that welcoming, encouraging, loving way of broaching topics that could be really uncomfortable. And you just do it so beautifully. You do it so welcoming. You do it with so much heart and so nourishing and nurturing. So thank you so much for.
You're more than welcome. And let me just add that in the back of the book, all these resources that we're talking about are listed. So and many more. So if people do want to explore some of the concepts, they can do that in depth.
Definitely, thanks for all the stuff about Daniel Siegel. Buy this first and then go to Daniel Siegel. Okay. Here we go. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Christy. It was just lovely. Thank you.